And good afternoon, everybody. Just curious, how many are here from LSE? Okay, quite a number. And from elsewhere? Okay, and the elsewhere is? Sorry? King's College. Were you there last night as well? No, you were there last night. Who's from King's here? Okay, a few of you. Where are the other people from? Nottingham. Okay, very good. Where else? Sciences Po. Who's from Sciences Po here? Very good. You've travelled a long way. That's nice. And anybody from Sussex, Warwick? No. Melbourne University? No. Okay, nobody. All right. So, good afternoon. Nuno and myself will be taking you through what it is to work in IOM, what we do and what the entry points are, what profiles we need. But I don't want to speak for an hour because that would be horrendously boring. So I'm going to open the floor up for questions after about 20 minutes or so. And feel free to ask any question about anything. I've actually worked for about 5 or 6 different parts of the UN. And for those of you who were at King's College last night, when I did a more general presentation on finding about jobs and stuff in international organisations, I'm certainly very happy to answer questions on any aspect of how to get a job. So IOM, very, very interesting organisation. Our mantra is humane and orderly migration benefits migrants and society. So we believe in migration, and that's one of the problems we have at the moment in the world, is that migration is a bit of a dirty word, and we want to turn that on its head and say that actually migration is something that's been happening ever since the dawn of time. All of you, by the way, at some point in your genealogy are products of migration. Some countries that are represented in this room, my own included, was actually built on migration. In Australia, where I come from, 2% of the people are Indigenous, and the rest are either convicts, migrants, refugees, or descendants thereof. I mean, so when I say the country was built, the US, the Canada, large parts of the UK, lots of parts of Europe are built and run on migration. Okay. So now a few facts and figures about migration. There's no actual universal definition, but it's a byproduct of wars, political conflicts, natural disasters, but also predominantly it's economically motivated. And if we look at internal migration, particularly in countries like China, where huge numbers of people have internally migrated from rural to cities, then there's strong economic factors behind that. In 1900, I think there were 14% of people lived in cities. Now it's 53% of people live in cities in the world, or 54%. 220 million migrants there were in 2010. There's 258 million migrants now, and an estimated 450 migrants by 2050. So it's a significant chunk of the world's population. If we were to break that down, the world population at the moment is about 7.5 billion, and there are about 1 billion people that have been a migrant in their life, either internal or external. So when we start thinking about the mega issues of this century, I think there are probably, arguably, 4 or 5 mega issues confronting the world. Number one has to be climate change. I say migration is in the top 5, population dynamics, peace and security. These are the mega issues of our time, human rights, etc. If we were to put international migrants as a country by themselves, they would be the 5th biggest country in the world, just after Indonesia and before Brazil. Okay. And if we had a fictitious country called Migration Land, let's look at the GDP of annual remittances that migrants sent home to their countries, it would be nestled somewhere between Thailand and Austria, and would be the 26th ranked country. Some countries actually survive on remittances. If you look at a country like the Philippines, 100 million people, 10% of their population are migrants, international migrants. and 10% of their GDP is from remittances coming home. And feel free to ask any questions as we're going along as well. Don't just leave it to me. Now, what is our mission? We want humane and orderly migration, and we work very closely with international partners and member states in particular to assist in the growing operational challenges of migration management. We'd like to advance the understanding of migration issues, and at this point I'll draw attention to a report that comes out every couple of years called the World Migration Report. The most recent one is very, very interesting. That can be downloaded for free on our website, and that gives you a sense of where the world is going with migration. We also encourage the social and economic development through migration. The migration is a very emotive issue. I mean, and you're seeing that incredibly at the moment. You're seeing like the caravan heading towards the Mexican border, and there's a lot of emotion around that. But there's actually a lot of managed migration, particularly labour migration, which has incredible benefits to society. And if you look at a country like UAE or Saudi Arabia, their economies are built on migrant labour. Their buildings are built by migrants. Even in this country, a lot of jobs that people don't want to do are done by migrant labour. And we also promote the upholding and the human dignity and well-being of migrants. Sometimes migrants can be in very, very sort of tenuous situations. One of the things that I think Nuno was involved in when we last worked together in Geneva was the repatriation of migrant workers from Libya during the Arab Spring, where I think several 100,000 migrant workers were repatriated to various countries. We have three sort of different pillars that we work on: one, operations and emergencies, migration management, and also international cooperation and partnerships. So if we look at operations and emergencies, we do a lot on preparedness and response, a lot on transition and recovery, so we focus on prevention and on solutions with crisis settings and fragile contexts. So in this regard, for example, we're doing a lot of work at the moment in the Sahel countries, trying to work with those countries to receive back migrants that have failed to make the crossing across the Mediterranean, but also those that want to return back to those countries if they've had failed asylum-seeking status or something. We do a lot on land, property and reparations, and this is one of the big issues with migration. I've worked a lot in conflict zones. I remember working in ex-Yugoslavia, and when one group of people are removed from a particular part of the country, sometimes called ethnic cleansing, the land issues that come up there are incredible. I had another one. I worked in East Timor, and in 2000, just after the consultation, the Timorese that had occupied certain buildings said, now this is a new country, we're now in charge, this is our property. The Portuguese from 74 came back and said, no, this is our property, we've got the deeds for it. The Indonesians said, actually, no, this is our property, we've got the deeds for it under Indonesian law. And then a lot of the international community said, well, we actually were sold the land and we've got the deeds for it as well. So it's a very complicated thing, land tenure, particularly after conflict. Resettlement and movement management, so we do a lot of work on transporting migrants around the world, and a lot on statistics and knowledge management. So when we talk about how many migrants have been killed crossing the Mediterranean, we're the go-to organisation for accurate figures on that. In terms of migration management, we do a lot of migration health. So this is, certain countries will take a certain quota of refugees and migrants every year. Up until quite recently, for example, the US were taking about 85,000 people a year. That's now reduced a little bit in number, but we do things like screen migrants for communicable diseases like TB and stuff like that. So we make sure that they meet the health requirements of the receiving country. Immigration and border management. So we oversee a lot of activities related to border management and try to work with governments to help find solutions for visas and that sort of stuff. We do a lot of work on migrant protection and assistance, labour mobility and human development, migration, environment and climate change, which is a big growth area for us. There are whole parts of the world that will soon be uninhabitable because of climate change, and in particular the Western Pacific. If you look at a country like Kiribati, we've got anybody from Kiribati here? Okay, no, nobody from Kiribati. Kiribati now, I think the highest point in Kiribati is 8 metres above sea level. So you can imagine what climate change is doing to that country. It's actually a coral atoll that stretches for about 2,000 kilometres. But most of their groundwater now is contaminated with salt water. So in order to make that country sustainable, you're either going to have to build up the land and import water, or close the country down. And that's going to create, sort of huge numbers of climate migration or climate migrants. And we also have a development fund as well, which provides special support to developing member states to deal with issues to deal with migration. In terms of international cooperation and partnerships, we do a lot of work with member states in particular, but also with private companies, with funds like the foundations, etc., to basically take a much broader umbrella approach to migration issues. We do a lot of work on donor relations, migration policy, and that's we now have a new role to play with the Global Compact on Migration, which was signed recently, and IOM has been given the task of leading that compact and what that means for member states. We do a lot of work through multilateral processes, international migration law, and of course we do a lot of work through media and communication about advocacy on migration issues, and basically bringing a degree of evidence to what is a very emotive debate sometimes. Now, the organisation has grown incredibly in the last 20 years. Our membership is, the membership, by the way, is the number of member states that belong to IOM. So we've risen from 67 to 172. Our expenditure has gone from about $250 million 20 years ago to 1.8 billion this year. We now have 470 field locations and many, many more projects, 2,227 projects. And our workforce has increased by 1,000%, from 1,100 to over 11,000. So the good news, if you're looking for a job, I often say follow the money. Okay, there is money in migration, and there's a lot of work for IOM, particularly if you're prepared to go to some difficult duty stations. We have a lot of work in Francophone Africa, in emergencies in the Middle East, Yemen, Afghanistan, places like that. We have a global presence. We're in 130 countries. Not all of them bad. We have a nice office in Australia, which is good. We have one in London. And in fact, Nuno is in our London office. It's quite a big office now. It's about 54, 60 people there. Yeah, so it's quite sizable. But again, many people who work for IOM get to work in different locations around the world. We have a mandatory rotation policy in the organisation, so that's kind of fun. In terms of our workforce last year, about 1,500 professional staff, like international professional staff. We have about 9,500 national staff, and we also have junior professional officers, seconded staff, and a whole lot of interns as well at any one time. As an organisation, we do actually pay our interns, which is nice. So we're one of the go-to organisations for that. Now, in terms of profiles, what we need health professionals. Hands up, anybody here doing any of the health sciences? Okay, a few of you. That's nice. Thank you very much. We like you. Okay. We have about 1,200 people there. We need project and program coordinators. So anybody with project management skills? Yep, okay. Thank you. Very nice. We like that. International relations. Anybody doing that? Oh, we've got a job for everybody here. No, that's good. Okay. Procurement and logistics. Anybody do supply chain management, procurement? Okay, very, very, very in-demand profile in the UN generally. Very. Information management, any ITC people here? No, they've all got jobs, that's why. And resources management, these are people like admin, finance, procurement, HR, logistics, etc. Okay, so these are the people that we need. We advertise vacancies certainly on the IOM jobs website. If you are interested in IOM, I would encourage you to bookmark the website. We do change our vacancies every week on there. Normally there's about 30 or 40 vacancies. But we also advertise through these other mechanisms as well. Impact Pool. Anybody here heard of Impact Pool? Okay, not a bad thing. I'd encourage you to join up Impact Pool. LinkedIn, of course, DevX, The Economist for high-level positions, and Relief Web as well. All right, so that's my brief presentation. Nuno, do you want to add anything to that?
No, just to say that myself, I started to work with IOM initially as an intern, and then was captured by the IOM in a field mission in East Timor. And since then, I've worked, I don't know, 20 countries perhaps. And I'm very lucky to be in London now. But at the same time, IOM, compared perhaps with other organizations where I've worked before, gave me lots of flexibility to develop interesting things. So I still like it.
Yeah, it's a fun organisation. It's an organisation that's going places. Okay, open the floor up for questions. Yeah.
Regarding
That's right.
regarding the job vacancies that are posted on the UN Jobs IOM website, how long is the process? Is the hiring process? Because sometimes, sometimes it can be a month, sometimes it can be 8. I'm just thinking about how to plan for that.
The answer is it depends.
Right.
Okay, it depends on the organisation. IOM's a little bit quicker than the other organisations. Broad across the system, from the point of application to getting a job offer, 3 months. I applied for that job on the 1st of February, and I started the job on the 1st of February the year later.
So would it make sense to, if graduating doesn't happen until September, fingers crossed, would it make sense to start applying now, or would it be smarter just to wait?
I'd look at about 3 or 4 months out, maybe 5 months out, depending on if it's a secretariat, a little bit longer. Yeah. Good question, though.
We're just trying to get spare mic, and it's right.
I think people, the acoustics are pretty good, so yeah.
I was wondering if you could expand on the mandatory rotation, just if maybe people have input in where they go, or if it's more like a zero assignment.
The mandatory rotation is interesting, and there are a couple of organisations in the UN that have what we call full-blown rotation. So everybody's mobile. UNHCR, the World Food Programme, IOM are the 3 sort of big ones that have mandatory rotation. And now, the way that rotation works is once you've been in a duty station for a defined length of time, so Geneva's 5 years, Afghanistan's 2 years, then you're due for rotation. The rotation list comes out, so there's a whole lot of positions that you know are going to be filled through rotation, and you can put a preference in for up to 5 different locations where you'd like to go. You can also put a preference in to stay. Just say you're in a duty station and your child is in the last year of school. You can say, actually, can I stay 1 extra year so that my child can finish the International Baccalaureate or whatever. Or you can opt to go for early rotation for the same sorts of reasons. We also have people that have medical waivers or personal waivers for whatever reason. Now we are probably going to rethink that a little bit now and maybe For the deeply technical, deeply normative positions, maybe rethink that. We're still going through a bit of an analysis of how rotation's been working for the last 10 years at the moment. But you do have some sort of say. You might not get the position that you want. In my last organisation, we also had what we call partial rotation. Only about a third of the staff were on rotational posts. I remember one guy, he applied for North Korea, and so we gave it to him. And when he actually got the letter that he was going to North Korea, he said, no. So I put that down as like number 3 preference, and I said, yeah. And he said, well, I'm not going to go there. I don't have a family. I mean, I've got a family. I can't go to North Korea with a family. So he thought he would never get it, but he still put it down there. So, yeah. Strange. But there's a lot of benefits for rotation. One of the things it does, it takes you out of your comfort zone. It cross-pollinates between regions. It means you can go across between different functional groups, so you can expand your comfort zone and your professional portfolio, etc. So there's a lot of benefits to doing that. We also talk about mobility as well as rotation. Rotation is one aspect of mobility. Now, personally, I've been organisationally mobile, as in I've gone from different types of organisations. I've been functionally mobile. I've gone from emergencies to HR to learning, and I've been geographically mobile. So I'm a big believer in mobility generally. Okay? It's actually quite fun. Where it becomes complicated is when you have kids, when you have trailing spouses, or not even trailing spouses, aging parents, and your own health concerns. It's a good question. Yeah.
What are the requirements, for example, if I want to have an internship job, like how much work experience do I need, what kind of level of study do I need?
Yeah, the UN is quite good at articulating what you need for certain levels. Now, here's a bit of a history lesson for you. The UN structure, where you have general service, which is the support positions, you have professional, P, which are the professional positions, and then directors, and then you have the political levels, Assistant Secretary General, Under Secretary General, Secretary General. Now, this system was based on the British Civil Service in 1945. Okay? The UN had to adopt one model, so that was it. Britain won World War II, so they thought, okay. And that in turn was based on the British military system. So if you're a P5, you're a colonel. Okay? Literally, that's how it translates. And they're very regimented about how much experience you need for each level. So a P1, you need 0 experience. A P2, 2 years. A P3, 5 years. A P4, 7 years. A P5, 10 years. A D1, 15 years, etc. I was doing a recruitment once, and the job was associate administrator. I think I told you this last night.
I wasn't there last night.
Ah, you weren't there last night. And so the word associate administrator, you think, okay, kind of a junior level admin post. It's actually the number 3 position in the UN, which was the number 2 in UNDP. And the first 450 applicants I screened out were under 25, even though the job description said at least 20 years of experience in administration, either at a ministerial level or as a head of state. So unless you were kind of like a child monarch or something like that, chances are you weren't going to make the cut for that one. And one thing the UN is very good at is counting. If we say you need 2 years of experience, we actually count the months. Okay. Now, this is where you bring up the idea of relevancy of experience. For young people, we cut them a bit of slack. Okay. There was one, I remember a few years back, I was asked to say, somebody said, look, this person has 3 years of voluntary sheep shearing in New Zealand for a democratic governance position in Serbia. And I said, no, that one's not going to work. For a start, why would you be a voluntary sheep shearer in New Zealand when it's one of the most highest paid occupations there? It had nothing to do with it. But if you're a teacher, or if you're working in your home government in like AusAid or no, not AusAid anymore, USAID or DFID or something like that, then that's directly relevant to jobs. So yeah, only apply for jobs that you have the minimum for. Some people say, do you count internships? It depends on the organisation. Here's a general comment though, and this is a generalisation. I'm acknowledging this is a generalisation. Women look at job vacancies and they say, oh, I've got 90% of it, I better not apply because I don't have that last 10%. And men look at it and go, yeah, I've got 50% of that, I'll have a crack at it, you know. Okay, women, you need to have more confidence. Okay, don't overthink it. There's a beautiful cartoon in Australia where there's a guy sitting there watching TV and the girlfriend's next to him on the couch, and there's a thought bubble coming from the guy, and his thought bubble says, wow, great game of football. And the thought bubble from the girl says, why isn't he speaking to me? Doesn't he love me anymore? Am I too fat? Am I, you know, like really overthinking the thing, you know? Okay, don't overthink it. If you've got most of the criteria, have a crack at the job, okay? That's important. Again, that's two questions in one. You're using up all your, yeah. Okay.
When it comes to some of the more, maybe not obscure, but lesser known languages, like Amharic or Turkish, or something like that, it could be posted in Ethiopia or Turkey. Does the organization help with that? Is that sort of a requirement up front? Or is it just, like if I'm looking at a position in Turkey, I need to be fluent in English, which I'm close, and then I need to, like, you'll help me out?
It's very rare that we would articulate in a vacancy notice anything other than the 6+1 official languages. The 6+1, of course, English is king, French and Spanish easily number 2 and equals second, and then Arabic, Chinese and Russian. We also look at Portuguese as well. Okay, Portuguese. Now, if you have that other language, I would certainly bring it up very, very early on in your resume or your application, because that can be a very useful thing. Okay. Yep.
Just following on from that, if so you have a lesser known language, does that mean you automatically get shoehorned into that kind of work? So, for instance, if you spoke Russian and I speak Russian for whatever reason, you just automatically be like, all right, you're just going to stick to this region then because we don't have anyone there?
No, not necessarily. Like a lot of organisations now, it's mandatory to have a second UN language. Like in FAO, if you apply for a job in the food and agriculture organisation, they will test you in your nominated second language, but you're applying for a specific job. So you could be applying for a job in Fiji, and they will say, what's your second UN language? You say Russian. They say, okay, fine, we're going to ask you a question in Russian in the interview. Because they look at your career not as a job specific, but as, okay, you're going to build in the organisation. So you don't get pigeonholed into certain areas because of language. And that's what a lot of Francophone colleagues find a little bit frustrating sometimes, is they always get moved to Francophone countries, and sometimes they want to be in non-Francophone countries. Yeah. But language is very, very important, but again, not an absolute. And I will say ashamedly that I'm monolingual. I can order a beer in maybe 20 languages, but I managed to navigate the system even with one language. How many do you speak?
6.
6, okay. See, that's sickening, you know, that's, okay, yeah.
Thank you for taking the time to give this presentation. My question is around the operational strategy. To what extent to deliver your mission do you recruit all the local, more technical skills that you need to deliver, and to what extent do you partner with local organizations?
Nuno, do you want to answer that?
A bit of a mix. I'm from one of the departments. Michael showed you there is the Department of Operations and Emergencies. In this one, partnerships are sometimes very important also for the ability to implement things. So that needs to be balanced. But often, and there are some areas that we don't want to explore ourselves in creating capacity. In the area that I work with, that is relates to data and information management and stuff. We do not want to analyze satellite imagery. We want to partner with UNASAT that is very good at doing that because we value that partnership and we don't need to spend the money doing that. So it's a bit of a mix, depends on the priority within the organization.
Now, can you answer that same question in the other 5 languages, please? Okay. Okay. Good. What else? Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about whether you have international consultants or on non-permanent contracts? So I used to be a consultant for WFP.
Okay.
Do you have similar contract types? And at what levels?
We have a bit of a different contractual landscape than a lot of the rest of the UN system. So yes, we do have consultancies. We also have a thing called an ungraded contract, where basically it's almost like a super consultancy and a quasi-staff contract in that you are a staff member of the organisation, you have medical insurance, you have annual leave and all that sort of stuff, but not all the full bells and whistles of a full international staff member. But most people sort of start on a contract like that or as an intern and then move on to more sort of serious contracts. We actually still have permanent contracts. We're one of the only parts of the UN system that still has them. They're called regular contracts. So after 10 years of service, you can get a regular contract. And you'd be surprised how many people clock up. Are you permanent staff member there?
No, not what you said.
But people say, you know, the permanent contracts are like golden handcuffs, you know. Once you're there, you don't want to leave. And so, yeah. But most parts of the multilateral system now are moving to kind of 2 or 3 year fixed term contracts now. And that's, yeah, don't ever sort of see a 1 year contract and think, oh, I'm not going to take that contract because I'm only going to be employed for a year. I've been on 1 and 2 year contracts for 28 years. But don't worry about it, you know. If your performance is good, you get renewed.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? Do
Sure.
you use less than a year contracts? Because that's what
We
I've
do.
always been on the past. Okay.
Yeah, we do. But a lot of people start on that. I mean, I actually did 10 years on non-staff contracts before I cracked a staff contract. Yep.
Is career growth structured somehow, or
How do you define career growth? Lineal or lateral?
in a sense that I don't know, there's 3 levels to get to the next one and so on. I mean, or is it more like depends on how you go?
There are, I mean, we talk about 2 different paradigms. We talk about a career management paradigm and a career development paradigm. Now, career management is when the primary onus is on the organisation to pick you up and manage your career. And the people that do this really well are foreign services and the military. Okay, if you're an officer in the British military, you know exactly what active service you need, what training, what leadership abilities you need to get to the next rank. Yeah. The other paradigm is the career development paradigm, and that's where the primary onus is on the individual to understand what the career paths are and to navigate those accordingly. So, primary onus, individual. Now, IOM has a combination of 2. With the rotation mechanism, there's a career management component, but the vast majority is a career development where you have to take responsibility for your own career path, your next assignments, applying for jobs and all that sort of stuff.
So it depends on your relocations and so on. You take a next step or you stick to.
Yeah. And that's, most organisations are in the career development paradigm at the moment. Okay. Yep.
2014, there were kind of legislation in Turkey that they will not hire Syrians. And
Syrians or Australians?
Not Syrians.
Syrians, okay, yeah.
So, are there any, like, is construction still available for stateless for refugees in Europe?
Yeah, we have, yeah, go on.
We have to abide by laws of work. We have privileges and immunities with the different countries, but then they will impose sometimes, like in relation to refugee populations, like some limitations. So I've had trouble to hire as an intern someone that was in the process of was an asylum seeker in Geneva, Switzerland, because the law of Switzerland does not allow you to work as an intern or to have any sort of work during that process. The same thing in Turkey. But here in the office in London, we have refugees, so asylum seekers that succeeded in the process that are working there because once they have the right to work. So it depends a little bit on the national laws.
And also, when you're employed as a staff member, then most often you will get a visa based on the request from the organisation. And even difficult nationalities, so-called difficult nationalities in the US, they still grant visas for those ones to work there. But there are some nationalities where we won't send somebody from one nationality into that country. Like you won't send an Israeli into Iran or South Korean into North Korea and stuff like that. Yeah. Yep.
How easily do internships morph into temporary or permanent jobs? Basically, the question is, are internships a good entry point for a job at the IOM, or after the internship we have to reapply for?
They're a good entry.
Yeah.
We don't have the constraints about the secretariat say you're not allowed to apply for a job for 6 months after you've done an internship. We don't have that. So
most of my interns, they end up getting jobs with IOM elsewhere.
Because we have a lot of entry-level positions. It's kind of good. Yeah.
Does IOM recruit interns for specific positions, or is it more general where they will be able to rotate in the areas and have different experience?
Two types of mechanisms. One where we have a lot of agreements with universities. Some universities pay their interns to go and work in international organisations. So we have an agreement with a number of universities, several dozen, where that's the case. The other one is we advertise internships, people apply, and they go through a competitive process. So there's two mechanisms there. Yeah.
What are all the requirements for internships, especially for postgraduate students?
You have to be in the last year of your study of an undergrad, in between postgrad and undergrad, or in postgrad, or within 3 years, I think, of finishing postgrad. Yeah, so it's pretty loose, you know. Basically, get to your last year of undergrad, and then all bets are off, you know. So really good.
Can I ask both of you what's been your favourite role in the many roles that you've done? Which has been your favourite?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll say a general answer to that. I have a nice disposition in that I'm generally very happy no matter what I'm doing and where I am. So I'm very happy with that. But probably the best role I've had was in East Timor. I was there during the consultation. Were you there during the consultation? Yeah, and then was evacuated and then came back and actually worked with the UN from a country that had been literally torched, razed to the ground, to nationhood, to independence. And it's so rare that you can do that, to actually work a country to independence these days, you know. So that was fascinating. And you put in a 12-hour day, but you saw the value for your work that day, and that was an amazing experience. So that's been really good. My first experience, I was 25, and I went to Liberia, and was sort of recruited by the UN there when the war started, and that was also a fantastic experience. But it was also very heartbreaking as well to see a country that was, you know, had everything just implode to a stateless country, you know, like a lawless country completely. You know. But still, again, the work that you're doing was very rewarding there. Yeah, but all my jobs I've loved, you know. Not all aspects of my job, but all my jobs. It's a nice question, though. Yeah.
When you're posted or when your duty station is in a more risk-facing or is more risky, say, and if you have a family, so maybe not children but a spouse and stuff like that. So how do you manage a situation like that?
With difficulty. No, it depends, and by definition, IOM works in some of the worst places on earth. The UN is most relevant in some of the worst places on earth. And managing a dual career can be tricky. I often say if they offer you a job, it's easier to get another spouse than the UN job, you know. But that's bad advice, so I'm not going to give you that. Okay. I remember in 2000, the UN contacted me. I was working for Care International, and the UN contacted me and said, "Do you want to come back and work in peacekeeping?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "What are my options?" They said, "DRC, Sierra Leone, Kosovo, and East Timor." And I said, "Kosovo, please." And they said, "Why Kosovo?" I said, "Because my wife works there." And so they sent me to East Timor. So we spent 3 years apart, and we used to catch up every 3 months. You know, that was the deal. But you can do that for a certain amount of time, but then you've got to try and manage the dual career aspect. And that's the problem in dual careers, is that sometimes it's rarely is it on an equal footing. Often it's there's a power differential there, and trailing spouses can lose a lot of identity and currency in their own profession and stuff like that. So managing that is very, very difficult. My wife consults with UNICEF. When I took the job in Geneva a few months ago, UNICEF said, "No drama, you can consult from anywhere in the world, take your job with you." So they were very, very good about that. So that's nice. Yeah. Yep.
Is there a general breakdown of the sections that you recruit from, so public, private, or union generally?
Well, most of our recruitment is done locally. If you look at the composition of the workforce, about 90% of our workforce, 85% are national staff, so we recruit locally. Of the international recruits, we recruit from everywhere. My former boss was a Nigerian, a guy called Dr. Babatunde Oshutamin, lovely, lovely, lovely man. He had lots of sayings, and one of his sayings was, "If you want to find something, look everywhere." Now, in the global war for talent, IOM is looking everywhere. You know, and this is why we're here today. Okay, so we don't sort of go to Harvard and only recruit from Harvard or anything like that. But certainly LSE, when I worked for UNDP as head of recruitment, LSE was the #1 school I recruited from. So that was because of economics and UNDP's mandate. You know, that was good. Yeah.
On that topic about looking broadly, you mentioned that a large majority of your staff are national staff. Mm-hmm. Are you best off applying in a country where you already have the right to work, or given that it is a migration organization, is it the type of situation where you should look broadly and maybe, work with the organization to get visas sort of like them?
Yeah, if you get a job with us, we'll get the visa sorted.
Okay, so you think that's better to search broadly and not...
But if you want to work in your home country, like if you're Belgian, you want to work in Brussels, then there's nothing stopping you doing that. So you just go ahead and do that. Yeah. Yes.
When you do internships, are you supposed to stay at one place, or is this like rotation thing also playing on already?
No, interns stay put. Okay. They can do different things though within the same location, but they certainly are required to stay put.
What would the job descriptors for internships typically look like?
It depends. It's very hard to answer that question. For example, at the moment, we're organising a huge conference in Marrakesh in December on the Global Compact on migration, so we have a lot of interns working on that particular thing. I have an intern at the moment in my own department working on exit interviews and making a better exit interview for staff leaving the organisation. So we do the whole umbrella component of migration. So it just depends on where you are, who your boss is, and what they're working on. So it's hard to say that. But what we try to do is to give interns like a real internship where we actually give them stuff to do, and it's not a kind of lip service thing. And do you have interns here in London?
Yes. I'm glad to say. So here in London, I have a team that does displacement tracking and is looking. It complements another team that is in Geneva that is very technical, people that program on Python, things like that. the ones here, there is someone working on urban migration, urban displacement, and analyzing data on that. Someone working on environmental migration. We are looking for someone with background on econometrics, and that knows how to make good econometric models to match that with our data.
Any econometrics people here? You are? Okay, so I'm going to get you to talk to him afterwards. Okay?
Yeah, so currently we have 5 vacancies open. One was shared with one or two of hygiene and tropical medicine because it's for EVD, Ebola virus disease outbreaks, etc. The one for econometrics, one on monitoring and evaluation.
Yeah, but again, go and bookmark the website and have a look, and you'd be surprised what comes up there that sings to you. Yeah. We're particularly interested in interns from the Global South. No more questions? Oh, yes, thank God.
I found the IOM and UN volunteer program activities quite similar. Do you have any coordination with them, or totally different? UNV is a service that services the entire UN system. So just about every part of the UN system has UN volunteers in it, and IOM also has UN volunteers. We have volunteers, United Nations volunteers, working on IOM projects. For example, we have, I'm dealing with one at the moment who's a Swedish UNV in Ethiopia working on climate change and migration. That's her portfolio. Now, we're looking at actually augmenting our relationship with UNV. We like UNV. We like the value proposition that comes with volunteerism. And so we'd like to double or triple our numbers of UNVs in IOM. If you're thinking of an organisation to start with in the UN, UNV is a brilliant organisation to start with. Okay? You have to be under 25. Sorry, you have to be over 25. And most UNVs are actually a little bit older. The average age is 39, I think. And it's not a voluntary thing. You do actually get paid about $3,000 a month, which when you're a student at the moment is sounding pretty good. And I've never known a UNV not to be sending home remittances. Usually about $1,000 a month they send home. It's actually a fantastic way to start and to build up the months of experience in a UN context. 28 and a half years ago, I started as a UNV in Liberia. So this is why I feel very passionate about the role of UNV. Were you ever a UNV? No, okay.
I was B.
Yeah, volunteer. Yeah. Good. What else? Any other burning questions? Yeah. No, this one.
Just like in general, have you seen do you guys focus on communicable or non-communicable diseases? In my background, since we're epidemiology, we've seen kind of a shift to focus on non-communicable. So I wonder if you guys are focused on both or just focused on one?
In terms of migration health,
it's a bit of both. So, for instance, 99% of the refugees that come here to the UK are resettled by IOM. And as part of the process, there is the screening that Michael mentioned before. So that's just UK regulations on the screening for refugees, and that's what I think. But then on the mobility tracking, there's a lot of programming that relates to Ebola disease outbreaks, things that can relate very closely to the concerns of the WHO, of the World Health Organization, of IOM, and how mobility can impact those diseases.
Yeah.
Is there overlap between the work you do and other UN organisations, not to be with UNHCR?
I mean, overlap. I think
overlap has a bit of a negative connotation. I think there's complementarity, and that would be that would be the best way to describe it. And certainly the relationship between UNHCR and IOM has been ironed out over the years, so that we know where the firewalls are between our two mandates very, very clearly. You know, there are aspects of what we do. There are cross-cutting themes across all UN organisations, like human rights, for example. Gender perspectives in migration, which is relevant for UN Women, relevant for UNFPA, relevant for UNDP, relevant for UNICEF. I mean, so that's where I think the confusion about overlap comes, when people say, oh yeah, we're working on gender, oh we're working on gender, we're working on gender, but we're all working on gender with different lens. And so I think the overlap, I mean, most UN organisations now have worked out that we shouldn't be competing with each other, we should be, you know, complementing each other. And that's been pretty much worked out these days. Good question. Great question. Yeah.
I was wondering if maybe you'd both be willing to share what your favorite aspect is of your current role, and then the number one thing that you would change if you could.
Favourite aspect? Nuno.
You don't have to start.
No. I need to think.
Is the director of human resources in IOM. But I think one of the things I really like, perhaps not so much on the role, but on the organization in general, is that I had never seen this presentation, but I was recognizing a lot of the colleagues that were there. So, all you know, I've worked for 12 years or 13 years with IOM, but we know each other somehow, and that's a very nice thing. But, also, then something I would change perhaps is that as it works to some extent as a family, because we know each other, there are also the dysfunctions that sometimes the family has, like the cousin in the line class or something like that. Some processes to deal with issues that relate to that might be very difficult to put in place institutionally, not only on human resources, but across the board on decisions on specific operations and so on.
What do I like about my job? I really like IOM as an organisation. It's an organisation that's fairly, shall we say, dynamic, as in it's always changing. And I kind of like that. And generally it's got a can-do attitude as an organisation, and I like that. I like the fact that it's dealing with an issue that's just so relevant and growing in importance. So I like that. I like where the organisation is positioned at the moment. We have a new Director General, first non-American in 67 years. We have a new Global Compact on Migration. We joined the UN last 2016. So it's an organisation that's really, you know, starting to flex its muscles. And I like that about it. What I don't like about it is that it's a very dynamic organisation. No, sometimes there's a level of frustration because the way that we're funded, we're 95% project funded, so that means there's not the investment in some of the foundational elements of what you need to do your job as a human resources director. So I'm always scrambling for money here and there, and I prefer some more predictability of funding, so I could put some more initiatives in place. At the back there.
When looking at the emergency context, would you say that IOM has a more direct operational model compared to other UN agencies?
Yes. Directly implementing, yeah, rather than working through partners. Yeah, very much. Our staff get their hands dirty. Yeah.
Sorry, just following up on your question so you're responsible on the funding. Do most of the roles that people have, is a part of it always constantly having to secure funding for their projects, or are there members of staff that's their whole job and everyone else deals with their own specific role, or is there a mix?
A large number of our staff rely on project funding. So, but a lot of our projects are multi-year funded projects. For example, we have a thing called United States Refugee Program, USRP, and that's multi-year over decades funding, you know, in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So there's a degree of predictability with that. We do have core funding for the organisation. It's about 50 million Swiss francs, and that covers the core structure at headquarters and stuff. But yeah, mostly the IOM relies on a very entrepreneurial spirit to go after and win relevant projects and then get them implemented. In fact, London's been very good at that recently. I was in IOM about 6 years ago, and one of my jobs was actually to downsize the London office. They lost the major contract from UK Border Control, and since then they've really come back now and done really well, so that's good. All right. We have an early minute, that's nice. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your interest in IOM.